Every now and again, Jews don't get along. Okay, so every now and again, Jews disagree. But it's interesting to see the things that we disagree about. Years ago, when I say years ago, I mean going all the way back to the time of the Beit HaMikdash, there were various groups of Jews, different sects, who had different beliefs. When we look into the Talmud, and admittedly we are hearing the reports from the Talmudic perspective, we hear about a couple of these arguments which raged. One of them revolves an event in this week's Parsha, and that is the date of when the holiday of Shavuot would be. The reason for the difficult discussion, or perhaps even the confusion, is because the way that it describes it is mimacharat Shabbat, from after the Shabbat. So the way that the rabbis understood it, from after the holy day. Not necessarily Saturday, but after the holy day, from after Pesach, we would account 7 weeks, and at the end of those 7 weeks would be the holiday of Shavuot. There were a group of Jews called the Baitusim, and the Baitusim said no, it always has to be on a Saturday night, which means 7 weeks has to be on a Saturday night, because Mimachrat Shabbat, you start counting after a Saturday night, and therefore 7 weeks would come out on a Saturday night as well, and therefore the holiday Shavuot would always be on a Sunday. Now, if one looks in this week's Parsha, one looks at Parashat Emor, and one looks at the ways that the various holidays are described, the words which are used, one of the words is used Shabbat or Shabbaton, which really means, for us generally, outside of this Parsha, it means Sabbath. Sabbath could be a Sabbath, the seventh day, Saturday if you will. It could also be Shabbat Haaretz, which would be the sabbatical year. But the Sabbath means a day of rest. And to claim that every time in this chapter where the holiday Shavuot is mentioned, to say that every single time it necessarily means Saturday would be not difficult, would actually be impossible. The reason for this is that the same phrase is used when it comes to Rosh Hashanah. So if Rosh Hashanah is going to be a Saturday, a Shabbat, and of course I'll mention the other possibility, it's not that it has to be a Saturday, that it's a day of rest. Certain work is not done on that day, and that is really what we find about all the Jewish holidays. Work isn't done. Not exactly necessarily the same as the Sabbath. There are a couple of exceptions to it, but on a general basis, there's no work which is being done. Now, the reason why I said it's impossible is because it uses the same phrase, not just for Rosh Hashanah, which it describes as being the first day of the month. It uses the same phrase when it talks about Yom Kippur, or Yom Kippurim as it's called, which is on the 10th day of the month. It's virtually impossible for both the first day and the 10th day, and subsequently the 15th day of the month, for all of them to be Saturday. You have to choose some of them. Which means if the 10th is Saturday, Shabbat, Shabbaton, is the way that Yom Kippur is described, then the 15th, which is called the Shabbaton, can't possibly be on a Saturday as well. If the first is a Saturday, then the 10th can't be a Saturday, and I think I've made my point pretty clear. Nonetheless, the Baitusim insisted that it must be specifically on a Saturday that the holiday is celebrated. The Talmud tells us that one of the rabbinic leaders of Yochanan ben Zakkai, he had a discussion with the leader of the Baitusim, and he questioned them on this point. And he said, where did you get this from? What's the idea? And they gave a response, and again, this is the Talmud reporting the response, which to me was incredibly disappointing. The response was as follows: it's clear and it's known, Galui v'yadua, Shemoshe Rabbeinu Ov Yisrael hayah. They say it's really clear that Moshe loves Jews. And because Moshe loved Jews so much, they claim that Moshe made sure that it would always be on a Sunday, and they explain, so that we'll have a long weekend. And that's such a disappointing answer. When I was looking for holiness and when I was looking for meaning, to find that that's the answer, it's because of a Saturday. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai says, if Moshe loved the Jews so much, and I want you to note something, what's implied in this answer is that it wasn't God who taught these laws, it was Moshe who made them up himself. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai said, if Moshe loved the Jews so much, then why did he take them wandering the desert for 40 years? But on top of that, the author of these verses, from Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai and from our perspective, is God. God gave us these laws, and the laws were not meant for convenience. It wasn't meant to have a long weekend. And what's interesting about this is a word that I mentioned in passing before. For Jews throughout the centuries, what's important to us is meaning. We want meaning in our lives. and to find a group of Jews in antiquity who argued that the main issue over here is really one of a long weekend, and it's really one of vacation, and it's really one of downtime, is, as I said, disappointing. As I try to point out, I think the argument has no basis on a textual level in the text itself, where it clearly says the 1st, the 15th, the 10th were all a Shabbaton. So therefore, Mimachrat HaShabbat means from the day after the day of rest. But it's the explanation which was offered, which doesn't just miss the mark in terms of the exegesis of understanding the verses. What's disappointing is the rationale that what we're looking for in Judaism is a long weekend. No, what we're looking for, especially in the holiday of Shavuot, is meaning. What we're looking for is the holiday of Bikurim on the one hand, and celebrating Matan Torah on the other hand. It's not just the question of a long weekend, having more time to eat cheesecake. What it is about looking for meaning in our lives, and that's just not a long weekend.